Greetings, brothers and sisters. So one of my viewers sent me this Sylvester Stallone analyzing his Michael Jackson painting. It's an interesting painting here. And his analyzing of it, his description of Michael Jackson, they were, people that knew each other. Sylvester Stallone was like the number one movie star when Michael Jackson was in his heyday, right? And they're pals, and his description of Michael Jackson gives you a deeper insight. And I've talked about this before. I talked about this very briefly in a video yesterday about Michael Jackson's evil side, but it's the central point. It's the key to understanding Michael Jackson's abusive tendencies. And it's the split personality aspect, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde aspect, and Michael Jackson's other side. So there was the persona that we knew was Michael Jackson, but Sylvester Stallone talks about Michael Jackson's other side, and so let's get into that.
This is something that has been percolated in my mind. You know, Michael Jackson is always perceived as this great entertainer, but I think his legacy also provides a great insight into my world, the world of, again, make-believe, entertainment, illusion. And I always felt that
So I talked about this yesterday, right? That Michael Jackson was casting a spell on everybody. And I guess a person that is sort of comparable to Michael Jackson is Jimmy Savile out of Great Britain, who was the Dick Clark of Great Britain. But Jimmy Savile didn't get the level of, this childlike persona that Michael Jackson was given, this vulnerable victim where so many people wanted to rush to protect him, and where Jimmy Savile was sleeping with children and everybody knew about it, and it became okay for so many people. So Jimmy Savile was like a wizard or warlock or something, but Michael Jackson cast an even greater spell, right? And so this is a big part of this. Everything that he built up as a brand was a spell to cover up the evil side of his evil nature, the dark side, the beast, the Mr. Hyde part of his persona that was sexually abusing kids.
Michael Jackson was one of the great dichotomies, and an illusionist. Even more than a singer, he created a character that wasn't even him anymore. He became something other, and he tried to manifest that in the way he would dress, in the way he would look, in the way he changed his entire physicality to become.
So this is really a great point, right? And this is what I was talking about yesterday. The guy morphed into some sort of ghoulish demon. And again, he looked so inhuman, but his illusion was so strong that people were still attracted to him and didn't look at him and get grossed out. Like when I looked at Michael Jackson, certainly in the later years, it was hard to even look at him because he was so inhuman and so freakish, and yet he was still this mega star. And what he's talking about here is that he's an illusionist and a dichotomy. He had another side. Michael Jackson had a dark side.
Something different, but more importantly, I always felt that his brain was being pulled in two different directions. One being very influenced by young angelic people or images or impressions or children. He just was drawn towards that, and the fact that there was an evil side, truly and it's like again, it's even a handsome evil. It's not a dark way. It's a theatrical evil.
So think about what he's saying here. He knew Michael Jackson. We've seen the pictures, right? We know that they had some sort of relationship. He knew Michael Jackson, and he knows he's guilty. He knows he has this other side, right? And I think most of the people in Hollywood know this goes on with lots of these entertainers. They all have this dark side. They do this dark sort of, they have this darkness in them. You can see here from his painting, it illustrates that. I mean, Sylvester Stallone's a lot smarter than I thought he was. And clearly he knows. This is something he sold, I guess, in Nice in France in 2015. And he clearly knows about Michael Jackson's other side. and what he was up to.
I think he wore that mask very, very well, because he fooled people by trying to be very childlike, and that's why I put the flowers in there. They're kind of kitschy, and like, oh, a man like this could never be like that. When in fact, deep down inside, you strip off the clothes, he sees himself as a very aggressive human being. Even though he comes off as this passive individual, Michael Jackson was a dynamo, and he was one big ball of contradictions and confusions.
So let's go back to this clip I played yesterday, because I was talking about this a little bit to do with this clip, but this is Michael Jackson talking about this other side that he didn't show to other people.
Well, what's wrong with sharing your bed? I didn't say I slept in the bed. Even if I did sleep in the bed, it's okay. I am not going to do anything sexual to a child. It's not where my heart is. I would slit my wrist first. I would never do anything like that. That's not Michael Jackson, I'm sorry. That's someone else.
We'll play that again. He says, I'm sorry. So let's take the first part. I'm sorry. He would never do anything like that. I'm sorry. Why are you sorry if you wouldn't do something like that? What are you apologizing for? Why are you apologizing? For not being a pedophile? Saying you would never do something like this. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wouldn't be somebody doing some of these things, right? And then let's play that again, because here's the more important piece.
I would never do anything like that. That's not Michael Jackson, I'm sorry. That's someone else.
And so that someone else is who Sylvester Stallone is talking about. So the someone else, and I talked about this yesterday, is his other side. They all have alternate personalities. So when I first started working with sex offenders and with kids who had been abused in these treatment centers and things, they all talked about, many of them talked about, and this is talking to adults years later. This is something I heard over and over again. But I first heard about it from these kids who had been sexually abused, and they talked about the alter ego. They didn't say alter ego. They talked about how when they were being sexually abused, their abuser was someone they knew, a loved one, someone who they were close to, and something would come over them. Their face would contort. Their face looked like a different person. Their eyes would darken, right? And that they had this evil energy and a different presence. I mean, this is, I've heard of this from many people. There'll be people who can write comments who've been sexually abused who can attest to this, that the person morphed into somebody else, this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And then after the abuse takes place, the entity leaves the abuser, and you have this Dr. Jekyll who's aware of what just happened, but something comes over them. It also comes over when people get really angry. You've seen people get really angry. If you've gotten really angry yourself, you get really angry or even really fearful, and you act in a way that's self-destructive. Is this guy Tyreek Hill, football player? Again, these football players are trained to be these violent creatures, right? These violent warriors, gladiators, a lot of hostility and anger. And the guy just beat up his son, and his son's arm got broken, and his career is likely over, or at least it's never going to be the same because of his actions, his abuse of his child. And you say, well, the guy's making millions of dollars. Why is he so freaking stupid? But, you know, with alcohol and drugs or just anger and hate, and the people have these things in their system, they get overwhelmed and a dark entity comes over them and acts in a very self-destructive way. So you see this over and over, right? Where people act in a way that isn't themselves or isn't their, who they are normally, and they have another side to their personality. And we see this specifically in Hollywood, where so many celebrities say they have an alter ego, another side to their personality. So you see this with Michael Jackson. He had this persona, and he was able to con everybody, even himself, into believing he was this kid-friendly guy. This is what Sylvester Stallone is saying. He made this painting of Michael Jackson, but he was hiding this monster within. And you can see it in his dance, his music, and even his whole orientation towards life. He had these aggressive lawyers that went to smear, and there's still a smear campaign now against the people, the kids that accused him of doing all these things, and how somehow they're victimizing him. That these guys are victimizing him, trying to take advantage of him and steal his money. And so This is Michael Jackson, the other side of his personality that you can't see. He had this one persona that could lure children, very innocent, very light energy, in terms of not being somebody with a lot of life force, just almost like this innocent, weak, vulnerable person, would lure them into this bedroom, and then this other entity would come out and abuse the kids, and then he would go about the business of covering it up.
Talent, without a doubt, but it came at a terrible price too. It's kind of tragic, but the truth is, we are the characters we play are usually the byproduct of someone else's creative mind, and eventually that's all going to crumble and fade away, and you're left alive looking at yourself in the mirror, and most of them don't like what they see, and they begin to, I think, self-destruct. That's why I hate when we see biographies of performers. The first 3/4 of the biography is wonderful. He had children, he was rich, and then when we come back after a commercial, the downside. And very few get out alive, emotionally alive. I've always said that an artist...
Very few get out emotionally alive, like they're taken over by something. They're still physically alive, but they've gone over to the dark side, right? It's not the creativity. It is the subject matter. It is the depraved nature of the subject matter. You can be a creative genius that makes beautiful artwork, or whatever it might be. It can be an athlete, it can be a musician, it can be an actor, an actress. You can actually do things that make the world a better place. But it's that they're channeling in darkness. They're going for like a low, sensationalistic, depraved, sexual type of energy. And then it gets overwhelmed because they're playing with demons and beasts. Now, I didn't believe in demons. I didn't understand that there was a level of demonic possession or alternate personalities and egos, alternate types of consciousness, until I started to hear all these abuse victims talk about this energy coming over their abuser. Then I understood that there was a lot more to this than the psychological community was willing to acknowledge, at least publicly.
Dies twice. And the second time he dies, the physical death, that's the easy one. The professional, the day he has to take off his mask and it's a death. Yes. And no one respects, you're like, oh, you're not special anymore, you're just like me.
Like a quick downfall.
Yes, you're just an aging old person.
This Dorian Gray idea.
And so, this is very telling. Sylvester Stallone is not even pretending a little bit that Michael Jackson wasn't a abusive pedophile. He's talking about this tragic guy, but this dark side, you can see all of it, right? So you have this side that people are still, and the red coloring here and all these things, the dichotomy, the split personality, the altered ego. I mean, you can see it in the painting. This is actually a well-done piece of artwork. And what all these people are still Michael Jackson fans want to believe in only one side of this thing. They don't want to see that Michael Jackson had another side and that he had to cover up his side. He had to cover up this side of his personality all the time. And so he didn't want people to think that he was this monster that was inside. But this guy knew. Sylvester Stallone's not mincing words. He's saying this is what this guy was. He knew him. He could see what he was doing with his business, with his lawyers, and all these other things. And so this was Michael Jackson. There was another side to his personality, and his one side was, and like he said in this clip, that's somebody else.
Anything sexual to a child. It's not where my heart is. I would slit my wrist first. I would never do anything like that. That's not Michael Jackson. I'm sorry. That's someone else.
That's someone else. That's the other person. That's the dark side of his personality, the demonic entity. And then he'd come to his senses, and he starts covering up for this creature because they're tied together. They're split, but they're one, right? They're occupying the same body, and he's responsible for this other side, which clearly happens in these celebrities, a fractured personality of the MK Ultra mind control subjects and all these other things, right? They sexually abuse these kids because it fractures their personality. So many people have been sexually abused, have distinct altered personalities, dissociative identity disorder, and dark entities. It allows dark energy, demonic energy to enter into the person's psyche. And this is Michael Jackson. This is what he's done. This is who he is. Right? This is who he was. And it's the dark side that was really a powerful dark side. Because think about what Sylvester Stallone said. Very aggressive. I mean, Michael Jackson was a good, cunning businessman, and he was aggressive, and he had this other side. You couldn't see it. He didn't show it to people. It didn't come out in public. He didn't do very many interviews until later on in life. And he still didn't do that many. And he showed this one childlike, innocent side, just like to play with children. And then there was this dark, pedophile, demonic, ghoulish creature, this entity that would express itself. And then he spent all his time creating this illusion to cover up for his dark alter ego. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the apocalypse. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.